Up until about 10 years ago, if you spent any time in Aspen, you would have gone to the Crystal Palace, where you would have heard the founder, Meade Metcalf, sing his signature tune, Peanut Butter on the Chin. Metcalf always claimed that he hated the song, but he couldn't resist the fact that all the big corporate CEOs who were there always wanted him to sing it. It's pretty clear why they liked the song. It was about them, after all. And it dealt in particular with the corporate CEO who was rather in a hurry to get to work one morning, sort of feeling that I sort of had myself about half an hour ago. He, after he shaves, he fails to make the proper ablutions, and he's had breakfast, of course, and no time to wash up. And so by the time he gets into work, he's going through a couple of meetings, and he finally gets a chance to go to the restroom, and he notices that he's got a lump of peanut butter on his chin from breakfast. Day passes the whole day with this embarrassing blob there. He goes home and he realizes that he's made a fool of himself in front of his minions, really depressed. Next day, goes in, doesn't know what the hell to expect. And the second stanza of the song has him back in with his top management team, and he looks around, and lo and behold, every single one of them sports a lump of peanut butter on his chin. All right. Now, this ode to corporate conformity is, I've had a very interesting introduction to a very serious book that I commend to all of you, Philip Zimbardo's The Lucifer Effect. It's a rather chilling account of a Stanford prison experiment that he conducted back in 1971. You probably heard about this storied psychological experiment that got out of hand. Young graduate students had been assigned to play roles of guards and inmates in an ersatz jail in the basement of a Stanford campus building. But the participants took their play acting so seriously that the scheduled 2-week experiment had to be cut short because the guards started to act like real guards, and they started first to psychologically and then to physically abuse the students who were playing the parts of prisoners. Now, the book is the first detailed account of what happened there some 35 years ago. And the retelling was prompted by the terrible events at Abu Ghraib in Iraq, which eerily replicated what had happened at the prison experiment years before. Now, Phil Zimbardo is a very interesting social scientist, in that his goal is to understand why good people do bad things. He wants to discover the psychological and the social sources of evil. He begins with a 300-page day-to-day account of all that happened in that hellish experiment back in '71, and then he follows it up with more contemporary review of real-life horrors at places like Nazi concentration camps, My Lai, Jonestown, Rwanda, and currently in Darfur. He looks at these familiar events in the light of 2 decades of social psychological research. Now, in the process, what he does is he turns what he thought we knew about the sources of evil on its head. For years, experts had asserted that people do bad things because they have an inherent disposition or a bent that makes them susceptible to temptations to do wrong. But Zimbardo presents scientific evidence that really very clearly disproves that assumption. It turns out that almost all of us are susceptible to being drawn over to the dark side. Now, the lesson is that human behavior is determined more by situational forces and group dynamics than it is by our inherent natures. Now, good people, that's ones like all of us, can end up doing unspeakable things that are out of character for all of us, given such conditions as peer pressure and the phenomenon that is known as groupthink. Zimbardo shows how easy it is to create situations in which really good people cannot resist the temptation to do bad. But he concludes on a very, very hopeful note. He says we can just as readily design systems that lead to positive behavior. Now, unfortunately, in this tremendous research that Phil has done, he mentions business organizations only in passing with some references to WorldCon, Enron, and the Arthur Andersen scandals. But in fact, his general conclusions illustrate the source of unethical corporate behavior a lot more adequately than do most of the published analyses that specifically address the issues of these problems in business organizations. What is important is that his conclusions belie the standard explanation offered by business people when people in their organizations are caught misbehaving. That standard explanation is always the same. Hey, there are a few bad apples in any barrel. Now, Zimbardo demonstrates that, in fact, ethical problems in organizations originate with the barrel makers. That is, the leaders who, wittingly or not, create and maintain systems under which participants are encouraged or motivated to do wrong. Tremendous implications for this, because instead of companies wasting millions of dollars on ethics courses designed to exhort employees to be good and do good, it's more effective for managers to make an effort to create corporate cultures in which people are rewarded for doing good things. Now, Zimbardo's conclusions are important for business leaders for a whole bunch of reasons. Not only do they help explain the behavior that led to rather rare travesties like Enron, but more immediately, they shed light on the quotidian organizational problems of pressures to conform and reluctance to speak truth to power that CEOs in Aspen found so hilariously familiar in Peanut Butter on the Chin. Now, in a book a few years ago that came back, my colleague Warren Bennis and her co-author Daniel Goleman and I recently documented how these organizational forces hamper a company's capacity to innovate, to solve problems, to achieve goals, to meet challenges, and even and to compete. We found that there was only one effective antidote, and that is creating organizational cultures of candor in which information flows unimpeded to those who need it, when they need it, and in which no one fears the consequences of speaking truth to power. Experience demonstrates that few companies are characterized by the kinds of organizational transparency that we're talking about here. Yet, the good news is that potential benefits of transparency are great. An Inc. survey indicates that companies with high transparency ratings financially outperform those with low ratings. The value of transparency is it keeps leaders and organizations honest with others and with themselves. It broadens perspectives, and it mitigates, in particular, against groupthink. Now, in practical terms, the information that those people who are at the top of organizations need at any given time is probably located someplace in an organization, in their organization, and that's one reason, obvious reason, why clear channels of communication are the sine qua non of organizational effectiveness. Thus, rationally, ethically, and in terms of organizational efficiency and effectiveness, transparency makes sense. So the question becomes, why aren't more companies addressing this issue? Why don't more companies address the common impediments that cause opacity to be the norm? Well, I think the reason is because transparency doesn't just happen. Because, as Zimbardo demonstrates, this runs against the grain of human nature. In all groups, there is a powerful desire to belong. Everybody wants to be liked. They want to be part of the family. Hence, the pressure to conform in organizations is almost irresistible. Nobody wants to be the skunk at the party. No one wants to tell the boss his fly is open. No one wants to tell the boss that he's got a lump of peanut butter on his chin. So, at the top of hierarchies, leaders understandably want to hide their mistakes, and they want to prove that they're smarter than those below them, and hence they don't need their input. At the same time, leaders hoard information because they see that as a way of maintaining power. Fast trackers, golden boys, members of A-teams see information as a prerequisite of their positions. Thus, some of the organizations are in the know, they're the ones who get heard, while others are left out and become outsiders or outcasts, to the detriment of the entire organization and paradoxically even to the leaders themselves. Well, that's why Bennis, Goleman, and I document practical things that virtuous corporate barrel makers, that is leaders, can do to create cultures of candor. Now, what we have to say is far from new, but it goes against the grain of what social scientists in the mid-20th century were telling us. They had taught us that we should seek to create safe and secure business organizations, sort of feel-good lands that were homes of well-modulated voices, places for organization men where there was little or no conflict, and where those placid souls knew they had places for as long as they didn't rock the boat. Those organizations were built upon the basic desire of people to belong, to be seen as clubbable, to be one of the gang. Now recently, social scientist Joan Allaire has looked at data about one of those hallowed practices of the era. That was brainstorming. Remember brainstorming sessions? These were designed to be freewheeling events in which no one passed judgment on the quality of any ideas offered, and because people didn't fear being criticized for their ideas or fear being evaluated, the assumption was that this would lead to an outflow, a great outflow of creativity. Actually, no. Research shows that it is debate, criticism, dissent, and conflict that lead to creativity. Productive meetings are, in fact, characterized by diversity of views, competing perspectives, logical challenging, and candor.